So when we're talking about imagery, what are your thoughts on just social media's impact on this conversation of social justice or the issues that are impacting people in our communities?
Imagery is a big one for me because, being a young black man, I wear dreads.
Yeah.
I work out a lot. So I'm always like when I'm not stressed. Granted, like I'm in my workout clothes now because I just came from practice. But most of the time, I'm looking more professional. When I'm not that, I'm in a hoodie. I might have my hoodie over my head because I'm in my zone, ready to go get my workout and whatever. And I know that I may look a certain way with that. I wanted to get tattoos, but it's made me wonder, like, do I have to get like a professional tattoo, like a calculator or something?
No, you didn't.
Well, you did that. Yeah, I had to. But it just you want to tread carefully because how certain images are perceived. And even on my end, on like how I see images, things like interactions with police.
Yeah.
We see on TV how those interactions go. So I remember going through a time when I was doing my undergrad, thinking like, are we all police really like that? Like, we all police just generally hate black people? It's like that too. So I remember walking around with like, anytime I see a cop, I'd immediately get a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I already know he's got something against me. Then as I was growing older too, I'm also understanding like, surely not all can be that way. Because you're also still an individual person. There's no way you're getting trained, okay? This is what we're doing. You see a black guy, it's automatically an issue, you know what I mean? And then what kind of helped me a little bit was, interactions I've had when I've been pulled over for like taillights being up and stuff, nothing bad.
I didn't make a judgment.
Yeah, so I've been pulled over, and then it's just we come on. One time I'm in the hoodie and stuff, so I'm like, okay, I need to, because despite the fact that like, yeah, I know not all cops are bad, it doesn't change like because of the imagery. There is a little bit of fear when I'm in there. Like, okay, I just need to, all right, get everything right. My license over there, it's in the glove box. I'm sitting right, and then let me, both hands on the wheel, right? Cool. Like, yeah, how you doing? Officer? Something well, my lights. Can you mind if I reach over? It's over there, and it's just, not going through that part of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I've been pulled over, it's gone so well. To the point, even like one time I was even asked to sit in the car and everything. We were talking in the car, and we even got to the point to where I got to ask, how do you feel about things that are going on in the country right now, social injustice, the racial divisions that are happening between, especially you guys and people of color? How do you feel about that right now? We've had good conversations, so that's kind of helped shape my understanding. And like, yeah, there's a lot going on that needs to be changed, but I think there are people who are trying to change it, but it's definitely a tough change.
Can I let you in on a secret?
Sure.
Why did you feel fear?
Definitely part of because of the imagery, and then I don't want to get killed.
Sure.
I just don't want
So the secret I would let you in on, when I get pulled over, I put my windows down. I have my stuff ready. I have my hands on the wheel. And if it's nighttime, I have my lights on.
Right.
And I am anxious. That's not you. I feel the same way. That make sense? Maybe for different reasons,
Right.
but it's still the same anxiety that I'm going through, making sure I don't move quickly, making sure I don't say the wrong thing. That's not unnatural. I feel the same thing. I think it's important for people to understand that. We all feel that anxiety when we get pulled over by the police.
Yeah.
There's not a special club that we're in where all of a sudden we can do whatever we want. I do the same exact thing. If I get pulled over at night, I make sure all my lights are on. I make sure I'm yes sir, no sir. The same things that I teach in school. This is how you deal with police. This is how you deal with them. I don't care what you look like. This is how you deal with the police. This is the way to do it, because that will lead to a likely outcome. You talked about a chip on your shoulder.
Right.
Because you were taught a certain way or you learned a certain way, and there's a bias to that. And what would that chip on your shoulder likely lead to?
Right.
If there was a confrontation? It would make it worse. And that's what we see on social media. We see that imagery of chip on the shoulder, back talking, disrespect, and the police are like, what did I do to deserve all this? I'm just trying to do my job. And then everything escalates and gets out of control. And then you have something, a tragic outcome, and everyone's sitting there watching going, why did it even get to that point? Like, what happened that this outcome became necessary? And then we have to go back and look at everything and look at the cameras and look at everything. When if we would just start from what you said, you've been stopped and you started from an attitude of respect, everything went fine. everything's good at that point in time. Just like I do. Just like I do when I'm stopped. I'm respectful. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Hands where they can see me. Lights on. And it's always going to be good. It's going to be a good outcome in that sense.
Chief, what would you tell to the students when, and this is because I want to talk a little bit about those fears. You talked about your fear of literally, you're specific, being killed. You talked about your fear of, I'm anxious. Am I doing everything right? My biggest fear is that my Black son won't come home. And I don't want to have that conversation. So when I'm saying to him the very things you're saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. What happens when you do it right and the outcome is still tragic? What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess I would add to the anxiety I was just talking about. When I get stopped by the police, I'm armed as well. And that weighs into it. Like if I'm doing the wrong thing, and if they don't know me and they see something, they see a gun on my hip, that could be a tragic outcome. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen across the country, across the world. So people ask me that question. Yeah. What do I tell my son? My son is a young Black man who is someday going to be a teenage Black man.
Yeah.
The same thing I tell my daughter. You behave around cops the same way I behave around cops. Respectful. There are only certain things in the modern day world that cops can do that aren't on video. Very few things. Almost everything's on video. And you guys see it. If the body cams aren't working, everybody's got a camera out. Everyone's watching. I worked at a large department, I worked at a small department. The incidence of things being swept under the rug, things being handled in a racially inappropriate way, a prejudicial type of way, you're just not seeing that overtly because most of that is disappearing into the sunset, as it should. That's been our goal as a community forever, right? Let's make this a place of social justice and equity so that everyone can just be okay and move forward. And conversations like this have to happen. Not just the five of us. They have to happen in communities. They have to happen in states. They have to happen in Capitol buildings. These conversations have to happen so that we can all reset a little bit and say, yeah, but that was 50 years ago. That was 70 years ago. Look at the progress we've made and how can we keep moving forward together? I was so blessed when the street was painted out front. And I wasn't sure how it was going to be. And I heard the conversations that we were going to try and do things together to further the conversation. And my wife and I drove up after it was painted, and I looked, and I had a tear in my eye. Like my wife was standing there, we're like, that's amazing. That's what we need. That's what this world needs, is better together. We are better together. This university, and I say this in my classes, I say it at my station, the university is good for Oskaloosa. And Oskaloosa can be good for the university and is good for the university. So when I teach in my classes, it's you are all part of our community while you're here. So let's figure out how to include you downtown, not just on campus, downtown. When you're driving around, you're part of our community. Own that. Be okay with that. Because people accept that. We're okay with that. Everyone's okay with let's be together. Because most people that I know, most people that I've met, they don't want strife. They don't want prejudice. They don't want arguments with people. We want to just be okay and enjoy life with each other. That's my experience.
What were you going to answer
that? I don't remember exactly.
That's a long time ago.
No, that's fine.
But I do have a new point. Just to address one of the points you made, regarding respect for police. I think everybody deserves respect. I don't think that people should be, disrespectful from the jump, in any situation, whether it be a teacher, parent, police officer. But on that note, you mentioned that, if you behave and you respond correctly, it reduces the chances of things going wrong. Well, Gina mentioned that, even when you do everything right, we still have seen instances. You said few, and okay, but when you look at instances where there's disrespect, across the board, whether it be black men or white men, it seems that there's different outcomes. And I think that's what a lot of people of color, it's upsetting to them. You know what I mean? Like and I hate to say this, but if, the response was the same across the board, I think there would be less upset.
Okay.
But when we see, black men, disrespectful, I would agree, but they lose their life. And then we see instances of white men storming the Capitol, spraying police officers with mace, throwing things at, them, harmful objects that could potentially kill them. And one, unfortunately, did pass or was murdered. We don't see the same brute force. And I think that's what's confusing to the black community. Could you respond to that?
Well, sure. It's hard as I talk in class about. It's hard to respond in particular to things because we're making equalities and we don't know what's equal. We don't know which incidents in particular are equal. What I can say is, if we have anything we can do to save our communities, to save us as individuals, compliance with law enforcement will save lives. We might still have the 1, the 2 a year where something goes completely wrong and there's no excuse for it. We will never be perfect. Okay? Our communities, our law enforcement, our government officials, nobody will ever be perfect. But if we can comply, if we can teach a basic level of respect, because I totally agree with you, everyone deserves basic respect. Trust might have to be earned, but respect should be automatic for everybody, for human beings in general. The odds of a successful situation happening, and that's part of procedural justice and social justice, the odds of a positive outcome are extremely, shockingly high with respect and compliance. That's just how it works. And if you look at the studies, they will show you compliance saves lives. Because you can always sue a cop afterwards if they're doing something wrong and you're alive. That makes a big difference. I don't like what I've seen across the country. I'm terrified to watch some of these videos with police use of force. Force is ugly. Force is always ugly. Even if it's totally justified, force is ugly. Manipulating, I talk with my wrestlers in class. Wrestling is an art form that's very hard to master. Cops are not born wrestlers. Force is ugly. If you get to the point you have to force somebody to do something, it never looks good on camera. It looks brutal because that's how it has to be. If something gets to the point of having to shoot and kill somebody, what do you think that does to the cops involved? We know somebody gets injured or loses their life, but we can't take that back once it happens. What have we seen? What have the studies shown? What does that do to the cops? Do we know?
Increase in mental.
PTSD.
Right.
Early retirement.
Right.
Suicide.
Right.
That's what the cops are dealing with. So would there be any, and I will call it an epidemic, there's an epidemic of police suicide going on right now.
I would, yeah.
Do you think that would be the case if cops are begging to shoot and kill people, if they can't wait to do it? Because that's how hunters are. Hunters like to go do the sport of hunting. They don't get PTSD. They don't commit suicide because of that. If cops were out hunting people, they wouldn't suffer from PTSD and they wouldn't be committing suicide at the numbers they are. So if you're talking cops killed by citizens versus police suicide, which do you think is higher?
Police suicide?
Almost double. Police suicides are almost double cops getting killed in America. That's an epidemic.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about, just from a historical perspective, because I think, again, it's necessary to reimagine, to reassess.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you think, you talked about social media's impact, imagery's impact. Can we talk about it too from a historical perspective? Sure. When you talk about the slave patrol, how do you think those cultural truths that can be ugly, right, are impacting the exchange now?
I think we have to keep our history, which is very unique, okay? And it's different from your history, but for those of us that are here, that were born here, our history is very unique across the world. Some of it's ugly, some of it's terrible, some of it's wonderful. We have a lot of wonderful history in this country. we have to keep it in perspective historically, what actually happened. We have to look in the books and get off of social media. We have to actually see what happened and the sequence of how things occurred. So in the North, generally police were modeled after the English police. They were actually professional, volunteer, and then professional hired police forces. Robert Peel had 9 principles he came up with a long time ago before any of us were here, where the police are the community are the police. We are paid full time to do what we as community members should be doing all the time, watching out for other people's stuff, protecting each other. If you hear a cry in the night, you go out and investigate it. And then the police are called in to deal with the aftermath of that. Unfortunately, in the South, that's not how it started. In the South, it started with the police were vigilante slave patrols.
Yeah.
If a slave escaped, they would get a group of people together, and they weren't police. They weren't called police. They were a vigilante group, and they were sent to return the slave to the slave owner. The textbooks will say that was the origin of policing in the South, but they were not called police. That's just kind of where things started in the South. I guess what I would say is we are far from that. We are very far from that. And as abhorrent as that is, we should not cancel that. We should all know that's where it came from. We should have that in our heads so we make sure that never happens again. We can't let that happen again. And the only way to prevent it from happening is to know that each one of us knows that's what happened, and we're going to protect from happening again.
And I think, too, taking responsibility for the history, the education is going to be really important because undergrad, I went to an HBCU, Historically Black College University, and I was in African American history one day, and my professor, she wanted to volunteer. And so I was in the front because I didn't have my glasses, not because I was, trying to make a super astute point. But I was there, and she had an artifact, actual slave chains. And at that time, I was, maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. And I remember the heaviness of those slave chains to this day. And then I remember her saying to me, Muriel Dawson, where she said, these are slave chains made for a child. And I was a grown woman. Almost, right? At least I thought I was, right? And so I say that because we talk about the Black Leadership Initiative, and one of our recent, activities was to educate. Because sometimes people just, it is sheer ignorance. They don't know the history. And I don't think Cargie Woodson, talked about, Black History Week turned Black History Month for us not to talk about the ugliness of, or even omission, or mischaracterization of our history. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of culture, or even, for example, we're in Oskaloosa, right? You talked about, being in the Midwest, how it's different. It does lack diversity in terms of where some of us, are from. But with that, how do you all think a predominantly white culture, in terms of your learning experience, impacts you as a student?
I can speak on that.
Okay.
Like last week, I was in, I think it was a leadership class, 8:15 general class, and we were discussing, well, actually it was February, it's Black History Month, so we were discussing MLK, we were watching videos, and I'm like the only Black person in this class, and watching the police and the hoses being sprayed on like African Americans and the dogs and everything, and it was super uncomfortable because I'm looking around my area see if I'm being stared at, and it was really uncomfortable, so it just made me feel like that really stuff changed in a way, but not really, so it's kind of upsetting.
And I think to Chief's point, he talked about how far we have come, because I don't think we can ignore that.
Right.
We have come a long way. But to that, sometimes I just wonder, and tell me how you feel, what you think about this. Do you believe some people, if they could, would enslave us again?
I mean, I think it's sad to think that there probably are some people who
Yeah.
may have been benefiting on a different type of level at the time, and who do, who would want it to happen. But I think it's also, we can also be thankful about, people such as Chief who, who wouldn't want that to go back.
Yeah.
And want everyone to be, equal on all levels. So it's definitely a sad thought, but I think you should also put as much focus on those who also don't want it to go back down to that
Exactly.
place.
It's frustrating.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is.
like,
It's,
why are you mad if my skin color? Like, I can't
Right.
control it. So it's like, what can I do? And I have a story of how like it's reversed the other way.
Sure.
My friend called me a few weeks ago. He was coming back from Atlanta, going back to Maryland, and he was having like car issues in like Virginia or something.
Mm-hmm.
He's a black male, and it was like a small town in Virginia, and he called me. He's like having this issue. The tow truck driver, he drove off my car. Like he's, giving me his side of the story. I need help. I think it was like real early in the morning, like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So he's stranded. So I'm like, okay, did you get the name of the tow truck company or whatnot? So I call the company. The guy he had an accent. He was like, yeah, the guy said that I was being racist, and look, I'm not anything about that. I'm just trying to help him get like more information on everything and try to like figure out like what we can do and like for him to come up with like a deal of what needs to be paid, to help him get out of that situation. And I guess because of where he's from, he's just not a fan of white people. So I guess he automatically jumped to conclusions that he's being disrespectful or he's coming to me a certain way. And like I just had to step in and like apologize. Even I'm in Oskaloosa, that man's in Virginia. I had to step in and apologize on behalf of him. It's like, I'm sorry, he's stranded. He's probably scared, because he's a young person, and just try to talk to him and make the situation a little better. So.
And I guess I would say that comes my direction too.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have to be sensitive to with my people, that work for me. We get judged based on our uniform. And when we have black cops working here in the same uniform, they get judged differently. And we have to at some point get there, and we're not there. And I get that we're not there. But we need to get to a point that we can all put aside some of that, start with the basic respect, work on trust over time, and then we can all get there. I think we've got the tools to do it, but the conversations here, that's great. These have to be on a national level,
Absolutely.
state by state, community by community, and then on a national level, so that your friend isn't making those judgments, so that I'm not making those judgments of other people. We have to get to that point. And we tend in the States to live in a microcosm where we think this is only an American problem. This goes on across the world. Things like this. There's countries that have way worse histories than our country does. And there's countries that have done things better in a lot of ways. But this happens across the world, and we need to be cognizant of that. And then maybe look outside of our country and say, well, what have these other countries done to move past, to get forward, so that you don't have to worry about that? We know you're going to succeed because you're a talented individual. That's all we need to look at. Doesn't matter what color your skin is. Doesn't matter what uniform I wear. We can all succeed, and I can help you, and you can help me.
I think that kind of piggybacks off of what all three of you were saying regarding education. I think that there's still a long way that we have to go when it comes to what we've learned in our textbooks, what we have conversations about. Like you said, it needs to happen on a national level. But I don't think that we've had a good foundation, or the best foundation, maybe I should say, regarding education. Just because I have a lot of conversations with friends, with family members, with people who are in my classroom regarding our nation's history, you know, personal experiences that I've had as a Black woman, I think that there's still a long way to go, just because, you know, simple questions that, you know, we feel like we've already, you know, tackled this, like why, you know, certain words shouldn't be used by certain people. I'll still hear people ask like, well, why can't I say this or why can't I say that? There had to be some sort of shortcoming in our education system where in 2021, I'm still having these same conversations with people, or, you know, and I want to be that person that, you know, like I said, can step up and have those conversations. But sometimes I'm just tired. I'm just like, you know, I don't think that I've taken it upon myself to be open-minded and have conversations, but I'm not going to expect or hold every Black person accountable to say, you know, have these conversations, because sometimes we just want to live. We just want to go out and go to class and, you know, or raise your kids,
Right.
or just go about daily life, because there's so much other things you have to focus on. But I think that there's a certain level of responsibility people should have on their own, whether they're white, Black, Asian, you know, whoever, you know, hold themselves accountable on educating themselves, rather than, you know, asking your friend. If your friend is willing, then that's awesome. But there should be a certain level of responsibility that each person has to educate themselves.
Very true.
You know, when I think of the Central Park side, for example, I mean, like, to these points, the list is long.
Right.
I think of, what do you see when you look at me? I would love to, I don't even want to say believe. I don't even think belief is a word. I would love for my skin tone, the hue of my skin, not to matter. But it does. You know, and so when I think of equity, I think, and I'll begin, and I want you all to share your thoughts, but if you could communicate, you know, pretend like we're on The View, right, to our audience, what do you really want people to know about this social justice struggle from your perspective? What would you tell them? And I would say equity means to me that there's some level playing field. We have a different set of rules. I have a different set of rules that I have to live by. I think of one of the latest issues, and again, we know more about it, not that it's happening more. I think we see it more because now we're capturing everything, to your point, on a smartphone, you know, through a body cam. But I think of, too, how I can say, and I'm not speaking to you now as a law enforcement professional, but as a fellow colleague in education. You and I could say the same exact phrase, but how it's interpreted or perceived will be completely different, because I'm a young woman of color and you are a Caucasian male. And that is the real life daily struggle. We all wish it wasn't this way, but I think we're all here because that's where we are.
Right.
And so that's what I want people to know. The same rules don't apply to me. I mean, if we're being very honest, how many conversations have I had with you, Nicole, about how it's different for women of color?
A lot.
And I say it again?
A lot.
A lot, right? But I have those conversations with her because this is how I would love for it to be. But the reality is it's not the same. So I find myself having to say, hey, Nicole, be careful with this. Be careful with that. Well, make sure you do this. You know, and it's this constant, like, I've assumed responsibility for her in that sense. You know, and so I think to some level, community is necessary. Bearing someone else's experience, you know, that is necessary. But I also agree with you that it's exhausting when you have to assume the responsibility of someone else's education. And I say that as a tired educator, right? and not tired of education, but it can be tiring at times, even outside of the conversation of social justice.
Especially when it's like repetitive.
It's
The
almost
same
like
person.
for real. Like what I want my students to understand about me is the same point I think that you're making about how using brute force for cheap bacon, right, is not what you want to do.
Right.
Putting in a non-passing grade is not what I want, you know what I mean,
Right.
to do. But where are you all with it? What is something that you want everyone to know about your lived experience? You
I'll
wish
say-
that you wish they understood.
I'll kind of share like that's my personal unique perspective because of course being from a different country
Sure.
first, and then I'll go on and answer the question. So, like so when I go outside and I operate outside, yeah, I'm a black guy, and after speaking to me, you learn that I'm a black guy from Zimbabwe. So I remember I had a conversation one time with a black American, and he was, we're talking about from Zimbabwe, and we were talking about what it's like to be black, and he was like, oh, but you're not black though. I was like, what do you mean I'm not black? He's like, oh no, you're African, but you're not black. Then I'm like, okay, I get what you're saying. I'm not black from here, but in the event that there is anything that being black holds you back from doing, I'm not gonna get the chance to explain. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm African. It's different. I'm different from me. You know what I mean? So like having that conversation was like kind of weird because I'm like, dude, how are you looking at me differently?
Yeah.
When we go walking outside, we're walking side by side. We're brothers walking outside. That's how we looked at. So that was one thing that was kind of like I'm okay with it now because I can understand like you're different, it's whatever. But at the time, that was something that was very hard for me to hear because it's like why do you have to differentiate me so much? And then you're talking about like different countries also having different struggles.
Yeah.
Like so, I don't know there's any country that has the most peaceful relationship with the police. Even in Zimbabwe, like sure we're predominantly black country, but after everything was going on with the Black Lives Matter hashtag, there was a Zimbabwe Lives Matter hashtag, and I don't know, you follow me on IG. I'm not sure if you saw when I was posting about it at some point in time, but like it's a time when people were trying to go out and just protest about how bad our economy is and how people can't operate just because of there's just lack of opportunities there. That's like part of the reason I'm here. Like I'm here because there's an opportunity here, but I'm also here because there's not an opportunity at home. If I go home, I'm probably on my parents' couch. I've got friends who are my age right now with master's degrees, dudes all working on their PhDs. We can't even afford to get their own place. We can't even afford to get a car. We can't even my one friend was like, I just want to live in a place where I can have a savings account. And I'm like, that's crazy, So there's a lot going on here. But me personally, I'm so thankful for what I can have being here. I can send money to my parents, because I can send money to my sister because I've been in a position to do this here. And then I'll be a fool to say that I'm self-made because my parents made a lot of sacrifices for me to be able to be where I'm at now. So I'm so thankful to be in the position I am now. To even be able to be having a conversation like this, man, to say blessed is an understatement, So in summary, man, I'd say what I think I would want people to know and I think is, we're all different. But it's okay to be different.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like we're not all supposed to be the same. There's 7 billion, 8 billion different people on the planet. And every single person looks different, thinks different, talks different. And that's cool. There's no reason that we have to be the same. You're you, you're you, you're you, you're you. We don't have to be each other. And that's okay. There's no reason why we can't be who we are and not be problematic.
Right.
We just need to be able to have that sort of understanding that you're you and I'm me, and that's cool. If we disagree, that's fine, but it doesn't mean I have to hate you for disagreeing.
Right.
We just think about what we do disagree, what we do agree on, and we can use that. The things we do disagree, that's fine, but that doesn't mean there has to be a problem in that.
Right.
So let's both not make it a problem. Like I need to make sure it's not a problem, but I also need to make sure I'm playing my part to make sure it's not a problem too. So we're both moving forward in that type of way. And that's what I think. Yeah, you know what I mean? That's what I feel like.
Absolutely.